When Alexander Hamilton was 17 years old, a hurricane destroyed his home on the island of St. Croix. And so he wrote about it. Now, originally he had only intended this letter to go to his estranged father. But a Presbyterian minister with whom he had taken up mentorship had encouraged him to publish the paper. This minister, Hugh Knox, had gone to divinity school at the College of New Jersey, which is now Princeton. And he encouraged Hamilton to send the letter there and to have it published. Part of the letter reads, "Good God, what horror and destruction! It's impossible for me to describe or you to form any idea of it. It seems as if a total dissolution of nature was taking place. The roaring of the sea and wind, flying meteors flying about in the air, the prodigious glare of almost perpetual lightning, the crash of falling houses, and the ear-piercing shrieks of the distressed were sufficient to strike astonishment into angels. A great part of the buildings throughout the island are leveled to the ground. Almost all the rest are very much shattered. Several persons killed and numbers utterly ruined. Whole families running about the streets, unknowing where to find a place of shelter. The sick exposed to the keenness of water and air without a bed to lie upon, or dry covering to their bodies. And our harbors entirely bare. In a word, misery, in all its most hideous shapes, spread about the whole face of the country." Now, when word of Hamilton's letter got out, people's hearts were moved. The businessmen on the island, even though they had suffered this distress and despair themselves, took up a collection so that they could send Alexander to New York. And there, of course, began part of his story that set him on a course into the history books. And the way that he began writing as a child, he continued to do. He wrote about the need for revolution. He wrote love letters to his future wife, Eliza. He wrote about and he defended the constitution of a new nation in the Federalist Papers. He created many financial systems that still exist today. He founded the U.S. Coast Guard and the New York Post. When he was about 55 years old, historian and biographer Ron Chernow wrote a book about Alexander Hamilton's life. And he was able to take the intricacies of creating a developing nation and weave a compelling narrative about the life of this person who had undergone so many hardships and had also experienced so many successes. When Lin-Manuel Miranda was 28, he read Ron Chernow's book. He said, "It was the fact that Hamilton wrote his way off the island where he grew up. That's a hip-hop narrative. So I Googled Alexander Hamilton hip-hop musical and totally expected to see that someone had already written it. But no. So I got to work. And so he wrote about it, creating the Hamilton musical, which has gone on to win numerous awards, has changed the face of Broadway and created conversations about diversity and representation and has gotten the attention of the world." So this morning I was invited to preach along with about 20 others across the country about Hamilton. We've each picked different songs to focus on. And the one that I'm focusing on is a song called Hurricane. It's a song about these troubling times that Alexander Hamilton faced. This hurricane that destroyed his town. Also the death of his mother when he was only 12 years old. In the eye of the hurricane, there is quiet for just a moment, the song says. We seek those moments of quiet, wondering where we go from here, wondering what's next. Hamilton faced many challenges, time and time again. It was his writing that saved him. And so he wrote about it. When David was a young boy, he was anointed by God to be the next king of Israel. And first he went on to serve the current king, Saul. And Saul was a difficult king. There are some who believe that the story of Saul is one of mental illness. Saul had fits of rage. Saul had times when he needed to be soothed, and David was the one that they called on. David came and soothed Saul with poems and songs and music. David faced difficult times serving King Saul, and he faced challenges of his own when he was king. He faced enemies. He was worried about how to serve his people. He wanted to find ways to serve his God. And so he wrote about it. The story of the Bible says that David wrote our Psalms. This collection of psalms to sing celebrations, psalms to offer worship, psalms to give thanks, but mostly psalms that lament, that cry out to God, that seek to deal with these tough times. David, or most likely others who were writing in David's name, recognized that life is full of ups and downs, good times and bad, joys and concerns. But they had faith that God will hear our cries and our calls. And so they wrote about it. Now this Psalm 22 that we looked at this morning, you may recognize at least parts of it. It often comes up during Lent. This first line, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" is attributed to Jesus says this on the cross as he's dying. And there are all of these moments of despair and distress, crying out to God. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. But what I love about going through the whole psalm as opposed to focusing on that first line are those moments of hope that you start to see. To him indeed shall all who sleep in the earth bow down. Posterity will serve him. Future generations will be told about the Lord and proclaim God's deliverance to a people yet unborn. Now, in the same way, Alexander Hamilton's letter finds hope. He says, "But see, the Lord relents. He hears our people. The lightning ceases, the winds are appeased, the warring elements are reconciled, and all things promise peace. The darkness is dispelled, and drooping nature revives at the approaching dawn. Look back, O my soul, look back and tremble. Rejoice at thy deliverance, and humble thyself in the presence of thy deliverer." Hamilton wrote to deal with his hardships, his personal hardships, the hardships of a struggling colonies and a developing nation. Ron Chernow wrote about Hamilton. And Lin-Manuel Miranda read that story and then wrote the story of his own. That's the Bible. This collection of writings exploring life, exploring the good and the bad, the struggles and the celebrations. And the Bible helps us by naming those struggles and by letting us know that it's okay to be angry and sad, reminding us that we can yell and scream and blame God, and reminding us that God is always lingering nearby, ready to take our hand. The Psalms remind us that God is with us in the good times and the bad. Ron Chernow and Lin-Manuel Miranda's work reminds us of Hamilton and the ways that Hamilton helped lead a nation and a revolution. And their work impacted others who impacted others. When we are in the eye of the hurricane, when all around us seems desperation and hopeless, when we are tired and weak and worn, when we are seeking quiet from the chaos, we can write about it. We can journal, or we can pray about it, or we can draw about it, or we can sing about it. What are those ways that God calls you to deal with those moments of chaos? How can you find quiet in the eye of the hurricane? When I was about 33 or so, I heard this odd call from God. And up to that point, I never thought that I would be a writer. I spent absolutely no time in school paying attention to the mechanics of writing or how to do it. But then I got this call and I decided to be a preacher, and now I get to write sermons. I get to write sermons and newsletter articles and all of these wonderful opportunities that give me this chance to explore who God is in my life. Hamilton's letter at 17 also shows this incredible humility as he reminds himself that he needs to remember the suffering of others, even as he celebrates his own safety. Yet hold, O vain mortal, he says, check thy ill-timed joy. Art thou so selfish to exult because thy lot is happy in the season of universal woe? Hast thou no feelings for the miseries of thy fellow creatures? O ye who revel in affluence, see the afflictions of humility and bestow your superfluity to ease them. Say not, we have suffered always, and then withhold your compassion. What are your sufferings compared to those? Ye have still more than enough left. Act wisely. Help the miserable and lay up a treasure in heaven. Now this pattern of writing that Hamilton comes up with, this humility that he shows at 17, these ways that he reaches out to others, well, it doesn't always work out for Hamilton. Later in his life, at this point in the play, when this song is performed, Hamilton is trying to deal with one of his biggest personal and political mistakes of his life, an ongoing extramarital affair. And he seems to be stuck at the beginning of Psalm 22. He seems to have given up hope. He seems to have given up on God. The letter that he decides to write in an attempt to save his political career is a train wreck. It's titled The Reynolds Pamphlet. This publicly published diatribe recounts in graphic detail his extramarital affair. His arrogance in an attempt to save his reputation only serves to damage it further. And I haven't gone over it with a fine-tooth comb, but from what I can tell, the Reynolds pamphlet, in contrast to his letter about the hurricane, has no mention of God. It's when he turns inward, it's when he becomes so worried about his own reputation and turns away from God, that it all goes wrong for him. So we need to remember to include God in our writings and our wonderings, to use our writings and our reflections as a way to be grateful, to find comfort, but also to remember that it's okay to cry out in anguish and sorrow. Because God is there, through the darkness and through the night, listening and reading and watching and reaching out to take our hands. When we are in the eye of the hurricane, when all around us seems desperate and hopeless, when we are tired and weak and worn, when we are seeking quiet from the chaos, we can write about it, or pray about it, or dance about it, or draw about it, or meditate about it, or sing about it. Let's sing about it together now, as we sing our hymn of reflection, hymn number 628, Precious Lord, Take My Hand.